So good evening. My name is John Wyatt. I've been teaching here at Coleman for a little over 3 years now. I teach at night. So tonight we're going to talk about presentation as performance. So briefly, I want to go around the room and just introduce ourselves and primarily what do we teach. So I'm John Wyatt. I primarily teach the software database class. I've done a few other software ones, but the database is my main area.
I'm Judith Ballion, and I teach marketing and leadership in the MBA program and sometimes strategic management.
Very cool. And the fellow who's standing up.
Douglas Mooney. I do video editing here and shoot video. Was teaching the graphic design program. Just finishing it up.
That's where I recognized your name from. Okay.
Cambridge graphic design.
Domenico Campos in humanities.
Joe Shupak, game art and development, or game design and development.
Travis Vasquez, game development.
Ramos, game development.
Tim McGarrett, I teach quantitative methods.
Tisha McGuire, I used to teach the mobile development classes and web development, design patterns, everything.
Cool.
Jack McCready, graduate ISM programs. All
Dr. Rushdie, MBA courses.
Very cool. Well, what I want to present tonight about presentations as performance, we can give anyone a book. We can give people books. They can buy books in bookstores. They can read them. But we only retain roughly 20% of what we read. We retain roughly 40% of what we read and hear, and around 70% of what we read, hear, and do. So the whole point of a teacher in a class is not really to just say, here's the book, here's the assignment, do the work, and then grade it. Now, the point of having a teacher in class is to alter the way in which we present the information to accommodate all of the learning styles for our students. So one example that I have here, it's about a 1-minute video. It's a 30-second video that's repeated twice. Just watch it and feel. So how do the first 30 seconds feel?
Chaotic.
Chaotic.
Fun too.
Stressful. Long drive from work, all the traffic and everything we get here. How about the second half? How did that feel?
Slower, quiet.
Slower, quiet,
A little inspiring.
little inspiring. And that's the whole point of having a teacher in the class instead of just computers that they log into or books that they read, because we are trying to inspire them and connect with them to improve their learning ability. That's what it's all about. One of the things I did in the beginning here was go around and introduce myself and ask you each your names, ask you to introduce yourself, so that we're not all strangers. It's not just one-way communication. Because teaching is primarily a performance art. What do we do that books cannot? Adults learn by involving them in the learning process. Just giving them a book is no guarantee it will ever be read. We have to relate the material to their experiences. I've often heard adults say, well, yeah, that might be true, but I have no use for it. Next. So it has to relate to their experiences. They have to see a need to fill gaps, presenting a gap in something that they currently do, and here's a better way to do it. And relating the material to their daily work. If it's not related to somehow what they're doing on a regular basis, they may go, yeah, that's nice, I'm sure it's fine, but I have no need for it. So as I began here, trying to smile, I hope, eye contact. Now, primarily in the North American cultures, eye contact is a natural thing. You have people from other cultures, like Chinese cultures, eye contact is actually used as a form of aggression and dominance. So here in this culture, primarily eye contact is how we make connections with people. If someone seems nervous with that and looks down, just accept that from a different culture. Walk around the room. I've been doing that quite a bit. Why do I do that? And there's a later slide, I'll get a little bit more into why I walk around the room, but I want everyone to feel involved. So that's why I do walk around. Sorry, Mr. Cameraman. Greet people as they arrive. As they come in, say hello, who am I, sign-in sheet. You don't feel completely alone. Introduce yourself and your background. And I did. I've been teaching here for about 3 years. I've been doing software, oh gosh, for about 25 years, and before that I was doing hardware. And then have them introduce themselves. Typically with students in the first class, we'll go around, who are you? What is your background in this particular field, whatever the class is related to? What is your experience in, say, business management? We have to build rapport. Every second, our senses get bombarded with about 4 billion bits of information. So if you would please, for a moment, everyone stand up. Our brain consumes roughly 15 watts of energy. And right now, about 85% of it is doing one thing only. It's keeping you from falling over. The nerves from your propriotic system have to tell your brain that, oh, my inner ears are tilted over, but I'm not falling, my head is tilted. There's a lot of work going on in the brain. It's a lot of information. You can go ahead and sit down now. Our prefrontal cortex can only handle about 4,000 bits per second. And that's our conscious mind. So the vast majority of information coming in is processed by your subconscious. We're never aware of it, but we do have to have the students aware of what we're saying. Our subconscious is performing the evaluations, and our conscious mind only gets involved as needed. The neurotransmitter involved is dopamine. Anyone who has ADHD or Parkinson's, they have issues with the creation of dopamine, and that's the effect that it has on them. So dopamine is the neurotransmitter to get the attention of the prefrontal cortex. How do we do that in class? To get the attention, we need dopamine, and it's generated automatically in response to a cognitive dissonance, some kind of a conflict within the subconscious. And the best way of creating cognitive dissonance, at least in a classroom, is humor. Teachers, professional teachers have known for a very long time that humor is beneficial in a classroom. But today they do know more why. The cognitive dissonance generates dopamine, which gets the attention of the prefrontal cortex. The humor should be topical in some way, shape, or form. It shouldn't just be random elephant jokes like I did in the beginning. I do like elephant jokes. So one of the means I like to do in class, particularly for databases, if you notice it seems kind of warm in here. Does it seem warm?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty warm. I'm going to try measuring the temperature. Oh, wait a minute, this is inches. Temperature is measured in degrees. I need a protractor. Oh darn it. Do you know if is this degree centigrade or Fahrenheit? What do you think? Maybe the data type is really important. How we represent the data is important. That's humor. It gets their attention. And I typically do that on the nights when I talk about data types in the database. But humor, topical related humor, wakes up the prefrontal cortex. And it has been positively correlated to improved test scores as well. Now, when you lecture, they say roughly the attention span of a human being is approximately 1 minute per year of age. But in lecturing, as a typical standard, we say no more than 15 minutes before some kind of an interactive exercise. It could be just some questions and answers, but something that interacts with them and gets a response back. Use visual aids only as memory joggers. PowerPoint is a way of jogging the memory so that you see and hear, because we have many different learning styles. But the PowerPoints are not the primary means, they're just a memory jogger. We don't do death by PowerPoint. We ask questions to promote involvement. Whenever we have areas in class, and not often a way to start something new is to ask a question. And we speak with them, not at them. It's one of the other reasons I also walk around and interact and often ask people how they do something at work or how they see this could relate to them in their job or why I need a remote mouse thing for this. We do use PowerPoint. Some tips: keep it simple, to the point. Make lettering bold and legible. I've never seen the problem here, but in corporate training, I sometimes see people with PowerPoints. They're totally cluttered. They're in fancy script, and no one can read them, including the presenter. And they just say, well, the PowerPoints will be out on the SharePoint drive, and you can read them later. No, we don't do that. We use graphics to illustrate the concept, because the brain is a graphical engine. Language is secondary. So graphics of some kind, just to illustrate a concept, helps get the attention of the brain. We show the visual while we're talking about it. But we talk to the audience, not to the visual. We've probably all seen someone stand up here and do this to the visual. We talk to the audience. That's why it's really nice here. They have the screen I can look at, because I'm never going to memorize this. I first wrote this many years ago, and I've never memorized it. Never had to. And disclose only the point you're discussing. PowerPoint makes that easier. You don't have to do the slide the paper down the transparency anymore. Because we can read faster than we can hear and process. If we show all the points at once, I'm going to be on the second point, and they've read all the way to the bottom, and they're not thinking about what I'm talking about. So we disclose only the points that we're actually discussing. When we interact with the class, there are interactive methods. You can do role play, case studies, exercises, well, maybe not that kind, demonstrations, but some kind of interactive methods with the class. So one of the case studies I want to present has to do with statistics. If you haven't taken statistics, that's perfectly fine. Oh, is that connected to that? Would that help? Yeah, let's see if this works. So in the world, children are roughly 50% boys, 50% girls. So in a hospital, people are giving birth. Roughly half are going to be boys, half are going to be girls. This work? Yes, it did. Yay! Thank you. So I have two hospitals. One is a very small hospital. And the other town is a very big hospital. And every month they report the number of boys and girls that they give birth to every month. So one hospital, gonna be reporting, the other's gonna be reporting, and maybe one will have, say, roughly 51% and maybe 52% boys, 49% girls, month by month. Another hospital might be reporting 68%, 72%, 15%, with the other 75% be completely unbalanced. Which do you think is more likely? Which one is more likely to be generating these wild statistics? The big hospital or the small hospital? What do you think?
Small.
Small.
Smaller
Small.
sample size.
Small? And say it again, because you said the reason.
The one with the smaller sample size.
One with the smaller sample size. Until people have taken some kind of statistics, a lot of people, about half roughly, say the larger hospital. But once you've taken statistics and you realize the smaller sample size will have greater variance. So this is a case study to sort of introduce people to the concept of statistics and variance. They don't really have to understand it at first, and as they learn it, they then have something they can apply it to. So that's an example of a case study. These manual display generators are working rather well tonight. In each case, our participants are going to be given a particular situation. And they share reactions. Ideally, we can do some kind of a scenario where we get people together in pairs or in trios, in small groups, and discuss it and talk about it. Because it also lets them interact with each other. They may already know each other, they may have been here for a while, but it gets them interactive. One brain plus one brain equals 3 brains. We present the general situation, and then the participants, they apply the principles. There are a lot of other various exercises, demonstrations, and case studies that can be applied. The only other one I want to apply at the moment, what's 1 plus 1? Letitia, what's 1 plus 1? 2? Are you sure? Okay. So I have some string. And yes, I do this in database class. So how many knots do I have? 1. That's pretty easy. And how many knots do I have? 1. So if I add 1 plus 1, how many knots do I have?
3.
3. So how I represent the data and what I do with the data really matters, doesn't it? But a demonstration like this, besides being topical humor, so it gets their attention, it also applies directly to what they're learning next, and we go into what they actually do with the various data types in the system. Some of the others that we do involve on-the-board exercises, but we did some of those in an earlier night. I know we did some where people came up and did some things on the board. Groupers versus stringers. Sounds like a fishing thing. Ooh, I caught a grouper. 2 different ways of viewing things. Groupers tend to look top down. Here's the big picture, top down. Stringers tend to go bottom up. Let's take this, figure out this, and now figure out this, and now figure out this. Now let's connect them together and build up. 2 major different ways of viewing. For teaching, what I found to be most effective is to begin from a grouper perspective, presenting an overall picture, often in the forms of an exercise or an activity. So now they see an overall picture, some application for what they're going to be learning. And then go down to the stringer level and go down, okay, now we're going to talk about this detail, this detail, this detail, and then start connecting them together and then see how it meets the overall goal. In the software world, I found that typically we have more stringers than groupers. In the business management world, I found more groupers than stringers. In people that cover both, you get a wide range. But for starting off in a class, I find that a grouper approach tends to work a little bit better, and then go down to the stringer level, bottom up, and then build it back up to support the case I made in the beginning for whatever case study or example I had. What types of questions do we have? Was that a question? Travis, what kind of questions do we have?
Types of questions.
Types of questions. Types. Well, would you have unsigned integers, floats? No, not those kind of types.
Open questions.
Open question. We have open questions. What would an open question be? Is that an open question?
Yes.
We have open questions. They solicit an opinion or an assessment. They do not have a single right answer. It's a good way to get people more and more involved, asking open questions. Closed questions ask for a specific piece of information, and they're used to test retention. So in the beginning of a class, early on, open questions are a good way to get people involved. Up just before, like the night before, just before a midterm or a final exam, a lot of times we'll do closed questions on the kinds of topics they're going to be tested on to test retention. There are direct questions aimed at a specific individual, right, Letitia? Absolutely. And there are overhead questions directed at the entire group. And there are reasons for picking a particular type of question, which I will get to. Because if you've already noticed, I've been walking around a bit, and sometimes when I walk up to someone, do you know what personal space is?
I do not.
You do now. Absolutely. Absolutely. When I walk around the room, if I walk up to someone, so now I'm in a personal space, you can see me, but you can't see my entire body unless you move your head or majorly move your eyes. And if I didn't brush my teeth, you can probably tell that. You can only see me. You can't really see the other people in the room. If there are other people with me, you'd have to turn your head or move your eyes. So your brain is connected with me. If I walk farther away and get out now to a social distance, now I can see several people without moving my head, maybe a little bit of eye movement, but not a lot. I can see your entire body without really having to move my eyes. Don't have to move my head. So I'm not connected one-on-one. I'm connected with the group, but I can still communicate back and forth with the group. But now I get farther away, get up on a platform somewhere, out at some public distance. I can see everyone in the room without moving my head. I can have one-way communication, and that's what it is. It is one-way communication, not two-way communication. Your brain can see me and half the room without moving your head at all. Your head and eyes don't have to move, and you could be focused on something else on the wall or down on your phone or your iPad or whatever else, even though your head is still kind of pointing in my direction and maybe doing this occasionally. There's no connection. Once I start to move, even though I can't get within personal space of everyone, once I start to move, you have to move your head to keep track of me. Your brain responds as if I was at a closer distance, as if I were a personal distance. When I'm farther away, my voice is a little less clear. So if I intone my voice, if I use inflection, your brain also responds as though I was closer in personal distance. That improves the communication. That improves the connection with the students. So how we use space does help establish the connection. We can enter their social or personal space to interact. A public distance, we are no longer interacting. It's just a speech, and you could be thinking about something completely different if you want. And I would never notice. Which comes down to dealing with some of the disruptive types, which when I do corporate training, I have a lot more of these than I do here. Here, the most common disruptive type I get is side conversations, people that just, they're not into it. they're trying to do the homework for some other class they're in, and they're just not into that right now. Or maybe they found a fun video game on their iPad or something. However, if you bring up the disruption, like, please stop doing that, you've immediately created conflict. And conflict is not something you want. But if I am just walking naturally around the room, and now I've entered their personal space, their brain cannot help but notice me. And almost always that works. That almost always stops any of the side conversations or other distractions. The farthest I've ever had to go was once in a corporate meeting where they had a really intense side conversation, and I walked over and I just briefly touched one of them on the shoulder, the intimate space touch, and then walked away, didn't say anything, brought his attention back, the side conversation stopped. I never, ever have had to bring up any issues about side conversations or distractions. Because once I do, it creates conflict. And students, much like children, know that they may not win a conflict, but they'll make sure I don't either. But that's a really good way of avoiding conflict. Silent types, sometimes people they don't seem involved, maybe they are, but they're silent. So John, what would a direct closed question be?
Direct close? What's your name?
Yes, like, my name is John. And a direct closed question is an excellent way to get the attention of someone who is silent. Maybe they don't seem involved. Just kind of walk over, use a direct closed question. Once they hear their name, their brain will respond. And a closed question is very simple. They don't have to do a lot of thinking, it brings them back in. Then you can follow it up with an open question and continue bringing them in. But direct closed questions are very good at dealing with that. Crabs and know-it-alls I don't really see here. Occasionally we'll get someone who believes from something else that they have done that, no, it doesn't work that way. But in the area of science or things like that, it's very easy to just demonstrate something to say, see, how do you think it will work? Try it, boom, and they go, oh. So again, examples in class are a good way to deal with that. The corporate training environment's the only place I've really had problems with the crabs and know-it-alls. I don't know if any of you had problems like that in the classrooms here. Really? Yeah. But again, with the direct closed questions and the use of space, a lot of it can be dealt with. Sometimes with the know-it-alls, say, hey, well, that's not really true. Sometimes what they're talking about, especially if you have them give an example. Give an example. How does this work? What did you see? And then they give the example. And then you can go there without ever actually contradicting them. Because once I contradict them and say they're wrong, I've created conflict. And I do not want conflict. At a worst case, sometimes it can be something that I can just say, we'll put it on the board, we'll talk about it at break time or later. This is maybe a specific instance of something that happens. And when we're done, we want to evaluate the training session. The program, the trainer, the participants' reactions. Being a school here, we already have official ways of doing that. In a corporate training environment, we have to do other ways of doing this. But here in the school, at least you already have ways of doing that. The important thing for us to remember is that teaching is a performance art. If people learned naturally by reading books, books would have existed before language. And we would have had to learn to speak so we could pronounce the books. No, it's the other way around. Is anyone familiar with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis? No? It was back in the mid-20th century. I think it was like 1930s, 1940s. It was two people, not the Worf from Star Trek. Sapir-Whorf, a couple of linguists. And they hypothesized and did studies to demonstrate that language and our intelligence go together. They work together. Through language, we learn how to organize our thoughts. And by organizing our thoughts, we actually learn to think better. One of the examples they used were the Native Americans, who thought they were getting a great deal selling Manhattan for just food, beads, whatever it was they sold it for. They had no concept of private property. The concept did not exist in their language, did not exist in their mindset. What does private property actually mean? Does it mean I own it?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Exactly. Private property means if I don't want you on it, I can kick you off. That's what it means. And that's what the Native Americans didn't know. They had no such word in their language. They had no such concept in their thoughts. By improving our language, we actually improve our ability to think. They work together. So as part of the performing, one of the things we try to do is just expand everyone's experience that they're having so that they can work it together. So, wow, I think I went more than 15 minutes without an interaction. That was not very nice of me, was it? What do you think so far?
Pretty interesting.
Yes?
I think something should be addressed with regards to how you present a topic with language and the uniqueness of the words.
And there's an interesting example I saw of that. At least to me, it's interesting. Scent. 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 Which letter is silent, the S or the C? I don't know. How we represent language is very unique in our language and in other languages, and we get into it in the database class when we actually have to go into how different languages and character sets can be stored and dealt with in your database. But that is a very important issue. Also, if you're doing anything in the management world, you really must know about the language and also other cultures as well. One last example I want to show here. As quickly as possible, tell me, how many dots did you see?
Two. One.
Are you sure?
Yes. Four. I'm gonna put a bunch. 12.
How about now?
25.
That is the same number of dots as that. The only difference is how they're organized. How we organize our thoughts determines what we can do. And this is something I always like to present to programmers, particularly early in the career, to show them all these things we talk about in software engineering have nothing to do with that machine. We could just write it in machine language. The machine wouldn't care. That's what it's running. It all has to do with us and our ability to understand. That's what it's all about. All is for us. Thank you. Thank you.